the Deaf Film and Arts Festival, marking 25 years of deaf education. The festival last night was the brainchild of the Centre for Deaf Studies at Wits University. The centre introduced the first professional program for teachers of the deaf in the early 2000s. We're joined now by Professor Claudine Storbeck, Director at the Centre for Deaf Studies. Professor, thank you. Congratulations on 25 years. Has it been rewarding for you and others involved?
It has been the most wonderful journey to be working in the Centre for Deaf Studies, not for deaf people, but with deaf people. It has been the most wonderful journey. And I think Wits has tolerated me because there was no such journey before. There was no such centre. So no one really expected what it could be or would be. And so it's just been 25 years of just growing and building and expanding one thing at a time. And I can't believe it's been 25 years. It's gone really, really quickly.
And I want to talk about the festival, but tonight we've been talking about the sad side of things, the unemployed, people who are very vulnerable in the economy. Some of them have hearing difficulties or kids with hearing difficulties. I know there's some outreach as well, but I'd love to know how hard is it, or how possible is it for people to get help in South Africa at low cost?
For deaf people, it's really, really challenging because up until recently, South African Sign Language wasn't an official language. And so just to report a crime, just to go to the bank and open a bank account, go to the doctor, go to the counsellor, going to the emergency room, they've always had to pay for the interpreter themselves, and an interpreter can cost anything from 300 to 500 Rand an hour, or they go without. Then they either don't do what they need to do in terms of accessing a service, or they go and just make do with kind of a back and forth kind of mime gesture. So that's always been really, really difficult. But even if you had a lot of money, just interpreters are scarce in the deaf field. Also, just a lot of deaf people unemployed, because who would want to take a chance with someone who might be difficult, and reasonable accommodation within the workplace is something that employers kind of shy away from. No, being deaf or having any form of sensory disability or challenge can really be hard for the individual. However, despite that, the deaf community have flourished and have stayed positive. And that's what makes it such a rewarding job, because they're also just such wonderful, passionate people who don't give up.
All right, so how did the Film and Arts Festival go yesterday? This was the first time you held it, a celebration of the 25 years.
It was wonderful. So we partnered with a young NGO called So She Go, all run by deaf people, two of whom I taught 30 years ago. So it does remind me of how old I am. And they had just come back from the World Federation for the Deaf, and they'd seen these Korean performers called Handspeak. This is the sound for Handspeak. And they said that they were remarkable. Now, we had no money, but you can't wait for money. So we booked them. And they arrived, and it's just been mind-blowing. So they were the kind of central act, beginning, middle, and end. And they do a lot of interpretive dance and sign language into music and sign language. So we had South African Sign Language, we had Korean Sign Language. And so we learned about South African culture, Korean culture. We had some South African performers, and then we had quite a few deaf movies. The most interesting one is called Coming Out, about a young deaf man who eventually tells his mother that he's deaf. And it's just such a wonderful, sarcastic kind of play, this irony. And then we had a very special visit from Elmo, from Takalani Sesame. Elmo arrived, and then we gave him an award, because Takalani Sesame has started giving deaf children access to the programs by putting on a sign language interpreter. So, Takalani Sesame got an award, and Elmo was the favorite red Muppet.
That is wonderful. And very quickly, before we let you go, I mean, the idea is to unite hearing and deaf communities.
Yes.
Painting, I'm sure, can easily do that. But with performances, is that possible? Is it getting easier? How do we get there?
I must say that the film and art festival last night was amazing because there were hearing and deaf people there together. And because I did worry a little, because the movies we had no interpretation for, it was a silent movie. And so hearing people got to experience the deaf experience. And when there were hearing actors, there was a sign language interpreter. It really does bring people together. And for deaf paintings, and deaf art, in terms of that, you're learning about a culture through art. And even if deaf people didn't have a language to talk about in terms of what art is, when you look at the art, they are expressing so much deaf culture, activism. So I do think the arts is definitely not used sufficiently to bring cultures together. And so last night we had sign language interpreters by South African sign language interpreters. We had an international sign language interpreter. We had Korean sign language. And then we had a thing called tactile sign because we had a deaf blind man there. So not only was the actual film and art festival an experience, but just watching how languages were portrayed in 4 different ways was also an experience for hearing people. And I do think they left changed. And then, of course, there was Korean food to taste because the ambassador of Korea got involved by sponsoring our food.
All right, well, good on him, and I hope it's onwards and upwards for the centre. Thank you very much. That was Professor Claudine Storbeck, Director at the Centre for Deaf Studies at Wits University.